30th of July 1984, the driver of a train running from Glasgow to Edinburgh in Scotland noticed an animal grazing near the tracks, a single adult Ayrshire cow. At the next station, he told staff what he'd seen so that they could advise approaching trains to proceed with caution. A cow on the tracks was not a huge cause for concern. Should a train and a cow come into conflict, it was seen as, without doubt, the cow would come to the most harm. What the driver did not know at that time was that the cow was about to cause one of the worst rail accidents in Scotland in decades. Around 5:30 p.m. on the 30th of July 1984, a busy British rail train left Edinburgh Waverley Station in Scotland, bound for Glasgow's Queen Street Station. The train was configured as a push-pull train, meaning that while it had a locomotive at one end, it had driver controls at both ends. It could thus travel in one direction with the locomotive at the front, pulling the passenger cars behind it, and then travel in the other direction with the locomotive at the rear, pushing the passenger cars ahead of it. The only thing that would have to change ends was the driver, who would move from one control cabin to the other on foot. Even when in the control cabin at the far end from the locomotive, the driver would still have full control of the train. Both control cabins contained identical sets of controls. For this particular train, the train in question was pushing rather than pulling, meaning that while the driver was at the front of the train, the locomotive powering it was at the back. It was a relatively short train, consisting of 5 passenger cars, plus a control car, which also contained some passenger seating, and a locomotive. As it left Edinburgh, there were approximately 150 passengers on board. The driver at the controls of this train was a man named John Kelly. At around 5:52 p.m., the train passed through an intermediary station in the village of Polmont. Staff at the station had, a few minutes prior, been informed by the driver of a train travelling in the opposite direction that he had spotted a cow on the tracks. This information was not passed on to Mr. Tennant, as the staff did not consider it of significance. Cows grazed along the length of the tracks and had occasionally strayed onto the line before. More than a dozen had also been hit by trains before, and in each and every case the end result had been the death of the cow and no lasting damage to the train. It was believed that, while a whole herd of cattle might pose a danger to a passenger train, a single cow would not. And indeed, even if multiple cows had been spotted on the line, they would not have stopped the Edinburgh to Glasgow train, but only advised the driver to proceed with caution. As it was, however, Mr. Tennant received no such warning. He carried on past Polmont, accelerating the train to a speed of around 129 kilometres, or 80 miles per hour. As the train rounded a slight corner, an object came into view on the tracks ahead. Mr. Tennant had slightly less than 12 seconds to react before the train hit it. Given that he was at the front of the train and thus stood the greatest chance of being injured by any object that the train collided with, it would have been a rational decision to retreat from the control cab back into the passenger compartment. Mr. Tennant, however, remained where he was and applied the emergency brake. The emergency brake on the locomotive at the rear of the train activated within a few seconds. It was not instant. A small delay of less than 2 seconds was designed into the system to allow the brakes throughout the train to be fully applied first, before the activation of the powerful locomotive brake at the rear. This was intended to reduce the impact of sudden braking on passenger cars to avoid passenger injury. In this case, however, this slight delay meant that the train had only just begun to decrease its speed when the object, which would have been discernible to Mr. Tennant as an adult cow in the moments before the collision, was hit. The impact killed the animal instantly, and also derailed the control car. Having derailed, the control car ran up the bank and was skewed around by the force of the cars behind it. The next car was forced over the top of the control car and thrown into the air, turning end over end before crashing back down on top of the final passenger car. The control car rolled back down the bank and smashed into the third car before the entire train came to rest around 90 metres, or 295 feet, from where the impact had taken place. train coming in the opposite direction saw a cloud of dust up ahead and brought his train to a halt on the line within sight of the wreckage. He ran to a nearby signal box to try and call for help, but found that the telephone there was out of order. Instead, a passenger was tasked with running to a nearby housing estate to find the telephone and alert emergency services. Meanwhile, the driver approached the derailed train to make an assessment of what had happened. The scene that greeted him was a devastating one. Almost every carriage had sustained some damage, with at least one almost completely destroyed. Dozens of passengers had been thrown through windows and were lying injured on the ground. Many others remained inside the carriages, incapacitated by serious injuries. At around this time, one injured passenger stumbled from the train and made his way to a nearby industrial estate. He returned with several workers from the estate who were the first people to respond to the scene. They assisted in any way they could, primarily by helping walking wounded out of the mangled train. Emergency workers soon arrived and began transporting the injured to hospital. The function room of a nearby pub was turned into a rest area for the walking wounded. Local volunteers served tea and coffee and helped uninjured survivors make arrangements to get home. In total, 13 people were killed in the disaster, including one victim who was just 9 years old. A further 61 people sustained injuries. An investigation was launched in the aftermath of the crash and very quickly determined that it had been caused by a collision between the train and a single old Ayrshire cow. Very little remained of the animal, but the parts that could be recovered were examined to determine why this had caused such a catastrophic derailment when, in similar past collisions, only the cow had been harmed. It was found that one of the longest and strongest bones in the cow's body had become wedged into the train immediately after the collision. This bone was of sufficient strength to act as a raft, lifting the wheels of the car out of position far enough to cause derailment. Further investigation was carried out to determine how the cow had gained access to the railway line. Many fields containing sheep and cows could be found on both sides of the tracks, but in every case these should have been separated from the line by strong stone walls or wire fences. At the time, most trains in the UK did not have deflectors or cow catchers mounted at the front, as almost the entirety of the UK rail network was fenced off to prevent wild animals gaining access. Near Polmont, it was found that a wall had been vandalised in a way that would allow a cow to stray onto the line. Vandalism of similar stone walls was an ongoing issue that the railway was aware of. Indeed, railway workers frequently alerted local councils to damaged walls to ensure that they were repaired. However, vandalism was so prevalent that it almost always outpaced the council's ability to effect repairs. Other factors that made the crash so severe included the particular makeup of the train. The locomotive pushing from the rear, combined with relatively light coaches at the front of the train, made a derailment more likely, as did the lack of anything shielding the wheels of the derailed control car. Following these findings, deflectors were added to many UK trains, particularly those that were relatively light, to prevent debris from reaching the wheels in the event of a collision between a train and any object. Fencing along all rail lines in Scotland was examined and many improvements were made across the network. In the aftermath of the crash, the idea of fitting trains with seatbelts was raised by the press, as many passengers had suffered injuries as a result of being thrown out of or across passenger cars. The idea was ultimately dismissed, as it was simply considered impractical on most trains. The use of push-pull trains was evaluated, but again, with modifications such as the additional deflectors and heavier passenger cars, this mode of operation continued to be used. The driver, John Tennant, was severely injured in the crash, but went on to make a full recovery. He was left with no memory of the accident. A plaque dedicated to the memory of those who died in the crash was unveiled many years later in 2009. The route between Edinburgh and Glasgow is today one of the most popular in the country, and the trains that run on it are, thanks to lessons learned from this and other disasters, safer than ever.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, good. I didn't think it was working. Hey, good morning. Do some push-ups today.
That won't work. Clearly. How's that gonna work? Oh, I see.
Do some stretches first. My hamstrings are tight from doing some walk on the treadmill last night. Did squat machine last night. back a little bit.
What a mess.
Other side. Let's do some neck rolls. Alright. You do some bicep curls this morning. A few more push-ups. Little arm workout. And we'll do some abs. I'll just stretch it out first. Try to get loose. Thank you, Vic. Vic, you're the only one watching. Thank you for watching. Just taking some dumbbells. These are some lightweight ones. I hurt my shoulder a little about a year ago, so I'm trying to just do some light stuff.
On the 9th of May, 1980, early morning travelers on the Sunshine Skyway Bridge in Florida found their view of Tampa Bay obstructed by a thick fog. Though visibility had improved as the morning went on, it was still bad enough to hide one very important fact from drivers. Just minutes before, at 7:33 a.m., the bridge had been involved in a catastrophic accident, and rather than a solid steel bridge, what waited in front of them was only a gaping void. In the early years of the 20th century, St. Petersburg in Florida was a city on a peninsula. Residents who wished to visit communities across the water would either have to endure a long drive or rely on a ferry service to complete their journey. A bridge was first proposed in 1926, and while the idea was a popular one, any practical action was deferred first by the Great Depression and then by the advent of World War II. It wouldn't be until 1954 that the bridge across the lower end of Tampa Bay became a reality. Built by the firm Parsons, Brinckerhoff, Hogan and McDonald, and named by a petition to state residents, the bridge was a significant achievement. Although quite narrow, it was at the time the longest bridge on Earth, with a main span measuring 6.7 kilometers, or 4.14 miles in length. It was of a steel cantilever design with a two-lane roadway perched on concrete columns anchored in the floor of the bay. A relatively steep elevation at either end allowed the bridge to stand high enough above the water to avoid obstructing the busy shipping lane beneath. The bridge was immensely popular, so much so that in 1971 a second span was added to ease congestion. The second span was essentially a copy of the first and provided a second roadway so that traffic going in each direction had its own separate side. While the bridge was tall enough for ships to pass beneath, the concrete supports did represent a hazard to boats. Between 1969 and 1980, 7 vessels collided with these supports. Although in almost every case the ships involved were relatively small, damage was minimal, and the functioning of the bridge was not affected. This was until the 9th of May 1980. At 6:30 a.m. that morning, experienced harbour pilot John Lero was transported out to the MV Summit Venture, a 186-metre or 609-foot long bulk transport barge. Lero's job was to safely guide the ship out of the harbour. It was standard practice for large ships like the Summit Venture to use local, knowledgeable and experienced pilots to handle harbour navigation. Once out of the harbour, Lero would leave the ship and the captain of the Summit Venture would take control once more. The weather that morning was less than ideal, with patchy rain and fog. Lero had spent the early morning monitoring the weather, checking in with at least one other ship near the Sunshine Skyway to get updates on conditions. Though they were certainly not perfect, a severe weather warning hadn't been issued to mariners, and visibility was reasonable. With this in mind, Lero started guiding the Summit Venture out of the harbour. As the ship neared the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, it was caught by a sudden squall. Strong winds, rain and fog descended abruptly, with the rain so heavy that it rendered the ship's radar ineffective. Lero ordered lookouts to the front of the ship, where they would be required to watch for marker buoys in the water. He proceeded cautiously, ordering crew to be ready to drop anchor quickly if necessary. At this point, the Summit Venture was already off course. Rather than heading to the open center span of the bridge, it was veering towards one of the concrete supports. Lero, however, was unaware of this until the bridge itself loomed from the fog in front of him, just a single ship's length away. Lero ordered the anchors to be dropped and attempted evasive action, but it was too late. At 7:33 a.m., the freighter struck a support pier at the center of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. Almost immediately, a 395-meter or 1,297-foot span of the southbound roadway collapsed straight down into the water below, taking several vehicles along with it. Lero made an immediate emergency call to the Coast Guard. All the emergency equipment out to the Skyway Bridge. Vessel has just hit the Skyway Bridge. The Skyway Bridge is down. Get all emergency equipment out to the Skyway Bridge. The Skyway Bridge is down. This is Mayday, emergency situation. Stop the traffic on the Skyway Bridge. Stopping traffic was, however, not something that could be done instantly. Up on the bridge, one driver was proceeding slowly along the southbound carriageway when he noticed that he could no longer see any cars on the bridge in front of him. He later gave an account of his experience to the National Transportation Safety Board. I could see the red airplane warning lights atop the bridge structure to the west side of the bridge. Suddenly, those red lights fell from their original position to a point out of my view below the roadway ahead. I began stopping, and immediately after the light dropped, I saw the overhead steel superstructure ahead falling. It seemed to wave and roll as it was falling. The man stopped his vehicle and began reversing back down the roadway. I must have got about 1/2 to 2/3 down the ascending portion that I had just crossed. I saw lights from the southbound traffic approaching me, so I stopped, rolled my left window down and started waving my hands outside the window, slapping the side of my car and yelling at traffic that went around me to stop. After I stopped, I remembered about 3 cars and then a bus passed, travelling southbound. Most of these vehicles, the bus included, were unable to stop in time upon reaching the fallen section of the bridge. They plunged down into the water below. The driver of the last vehicle to reach the broken section was able to stop with only moments to spare. He fled from his vehicle, leaving it balanced precariously on the very edge of the drop. In total, 6 cars, 1 truck, and a Greyhound bus either fell when the initial collapse took place, or were unable to stop before driving off the broken roadway. The drop was a significant one, about 46 meters or 150 feet. The National Transportation Safety Board later noted that the damage to vehicles which fell from the bridge into the water was equivalent to the damage that would be expected if they had impacted a solid surface. Only a single person who entered the water survived. 56-year-old Wesley McIntyre's vehicle fell during the initial collapse of the bridge. He later described how the rapid drop caused him to reflexively apply his brakes, something which, of course, was not effective in his situation. His pickup truck impacted the Summit Venture and then fell into the water, at which point Mr. McIntyre was able to force his way out and swim to the surface. He was pulled out of the water by the crew of the Summit Venture. Mr. McIntyre was the only one to be rescued in this manner. The other 35 individuals who fell from the bridge inside their vehicles did not make it out of the water alive. 25 of those who died were on board the bus, a Greyhound that was carrying a large number of students from Tuskegee University, among others. In the aftermath of the disaster, an investigation was launched. An inquiry carried out by the Coast Guard criticized pilot John Lero's decision to proceed despite adverse weather conditions, and said that this decision had contributed to the crash. However, it also acknowledged that many other factors had also played a part. These included the fact that the school had not been forecast, and the favorable reports of weather conditions given by other ships in the area at the time. It was also noted that there was no impact protection for the concrete supports. Wooden fenders had been installed around the base of the supports during the construction of the bridge, but these had swiftly rotted away and not been replaced. Ultimately, Mr. Lero was cleared of negligence, and it was acknowledged that he had taken actions that were reasonable given the information and options he had available at the time. Mr. Lero was allowed to return to work as a harbour pilot, but was soon thereafter diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and was unable to continue. He worked a number of different jobs during the later years of his life, including training nautical science students at the State University of New York's Maritime College. While there, he used his experience as an example to new cadets, often telling them, "If you misjudge, you've got hell to pay." Later, he worked as a counsellor, providing support for convicts and the victims of crime. The new replacement bridge, which stands in place today, was opened 7 years after the disaster. Concrete fenders were installed around the bridge supports to protect them from collisions. These proved immediately effective when a shrimp boat collided head-on with them the day before the bridge's official opening, causing the boat to sink, but the bridge to be entirely unaffected. A warning system was also put in place to inform drivers of hazardous conditions and close access to the bridge in the case of extreme weather. In 2014, the Skyway Memorial Project, started by a local author, raised $9,000 to build a granite memorial with a bronze plaque in memory of the 35 people who lost their lives in the collapse. This now stands in a small rest area, which overlooks the site of the accident in the middle of Tampa Bay.
At Ashley, you can find what you love and save up to $1,000 store-wide. So it's not just Black Friday. It's the Ashley Tonight I'm Going to Sleep Like a Log, whatever that means, Black Friday event. The Ashley, there's no way my husband's snoring is going to keep me awake now, Black Friday event. But don't wait, because it's also the Ashley, ooh, look, you can get 0% interest for 72 months, Black Friday event.
Oh, silly. Oh. I would say the instructions for this one made it more complicated than it should have been. Oh well, that's building done. Now I can put that room together. Yay! First I have to clean up this mess.